The air in the royal chamber is thick with the ghosts of yesterday's dawns. It is a space defined not by its opulence, by the intricate geometric patterns of the tiles underfoot or the heavy silk of the divans, but by its function. This is a room of endings. It smells of expensive oud incense, a sweet, cloying scent meant to mask the metallic tang of fear that lingers in the fabric of the curtains, in the very mortar of the walls. 1,000 nights have begun in this room, but only one has ever ended for the woman in the king's bed. The rest have been severed, truncated by the first hint of gray light that spills over the palace walls, a light that promises a new day for the city of Baghdad, but only a final, silent moment for the king's bride. King Shahriyar does not sleep. He lies on his back, a mountain of brocaded fabric and coiled muscle, his eyes fixed on the carved cedar ceiling. His is a vigil not of anticipation, but of grim repetition. He is a man trapped in the machinery of his own decree, a prisoner of a wound so deep it has turned his entire kingdom into an extension of his own private hell. The betrayal of his first wife was not a simple infidelity, it was an ontological crisis. It did not just break his heart, it shattered his perception of reality itself. If the one he trusted most could be a vessel of such profound deception, then the entire world and every woman in it was a text written in a language of lies. His solution was as brutal as it was logical to his fractured mind: to possess and then to destroy before the lie could take root again. Each morning, the scimitar of the royal executioner is his only truth, the clean, final stroke his only certainty in a world that has become fundamentally untrustworthy. But tonight something is different. The usual silence, the heavy, waiting quiet that precedes the inevitable is absent. In its place there is a voice. It is a low, steady voice, a thread of sound weaving through the suffocating stillness. It belongs to the woman beside him, Scheherazade, the vizier's daughter. She was another lamb for the slaughter, another beautiful, temporary thing destined to be erased by the sunrise. Yet she is not weeping, she is not pleading, she is telling a story. The story is of a merchant and a genie, a tale of debts and impossible bargains. Her words are not mere sounds, they are structures. They build rooms in the air, erect bustling marketplaces in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She describes the feel of dust on a traveler's sandals, the precise weight of a gold dinar in a worried man's palm, the shimmering, terrifying form of a genie emerging from a brass lamp, his anger like a hot desert wind. The king listens. At first, it is an idle distraction, a novelty that will soon fade, but the story deepens. It fractures, multiplies. The merchant, to save his own life from the genie, offers the stories of 3 old men who have witnessed wonders. One story blooms into 3, and each of those stories contains its own universe of sorrow and magic. Scheherazade's voice is the only anchor in a world that has, for the king, lost all meaning. It does not demand his trust. It does not ask for his love or his mercy. It asks only for his attention. It creates a space, a temporary reality governed not by the brutal certainty of his decree, but by the tantalizing uncertainty of what happens next. As the first pale finger of light touches the alabaster lattice of the window, she falls silent. She does not conclude the story. The merchant's fate hangs in the balance, a life suspended mid-sentence. The king, for the first time in 1,000 nights, is faced with a new kind of desire, a new form of uncertainty. It is not the uncertainty of betrayal, but the burning need for narrative resolution. The executioner can wait, the story cannot. In that moment, a subtle but seismic shift occurs. The power in the room is no longer solely with the man who holds the power of life and death. It is shared for a moment with the woman who holds the power of the next word. This is the central, pulsating question born in that silent dawn. Can a story, a thing made of mere breath and memory, be strong enough to hold back a sword? Can the telling of a tale become an act of creation so potent that it can postpone the finality of death itself? To understand the weapon Scheherazade chose, one must first understand the world that forged it. The Baghdad of the Abbasid Caliphate was not just a city, it was the center of the world, a vibrant, chaotic organism of thought and commerce. Visually, it was a labyrinth of ochre and sand-colored buildings, their flat roofs forming a second city against the impossibly blue sky. The great Tigris River, the color of milky tea, snaked through its heart, plied by round guffa boats and elegant barges. The streets were a dizzying sensory overload. From the grand avenues leading to the caliph's palace to the narrow, winding alleys of the souks, the city was a tapestry of sights. Merchants in brilliant turbans, veiled women whose eyes held entire histories, scholars with ink-stained fingers debating points of law and astronomy, beggars whose poverty was as stark and absolute as the desert sun. The air was a cacophony of sound, a constant hum composed of 1,000 distinct notes. The rhythmic clang of the coppersmith's hammer, the sing-song cry of the water seller, the braying of donkeys, the murmur of prayer from countless minarets, and the ceaseless, energetic babble of Arabic, Persian, and a dozen other tongues. The city had a smell, an unforgettable perfume of life itself. It was the sharp, intoxicating scent of spices, cardamom, cumin, and saffron piled high in vibrant pyramids in the market stalls. It was the sweet aroma of baking flatbread from communal ovens, a smell that meant home and sustenance. It was the delicate fragrance of jasmine and rosewater drifting from hidden courtyard gardens, a secret promise of beauty behind high walls. But it was also the smell of reality, of existence in all its raw forms. The earthy scent of the river mud, the pungent odor of livestock, and the ever-present faint smell of dust and decay, a reminder that even this great city was built on the edge of a vast and unforgiving wilderness. The sense of touch was one of contrasts. It was the coolness of a marble fountain in a shaded courtyard, a blessed relief from the oppressive heat that radiated from the baked earth walls. It was the rough texture of a camel's hide, the smooth, worn surface of a wooden prayer bead, the delicate, almost weightless feel of a silk scroll in a scholar's hands. And taste, the taste of this world was a revelation. It was the intense sweetness of dates and honeyed pastries, the savory complexity of a lamb tagine rich with apricots and almonds, the simple, life-giving pleasure of a cup of cool water drawn from a communal well. This was the world that produced Scheherazade, a world where stories were not just entertainment, but a currency, a form of knowledge, a way of navigating the immense, beautiful, and dangerous complexities of life. She was the daughter of this city, a place where 1,000 different realities coexisted on every street corner. She was the vizier's daughter, which meant she lived a life of privilege but also of observation. Her childhood was not one of idle play but of quiet absorption in her father's library. While other children learned games, she learned alphabets. The library was her universe. The air within it was different from the rest of the palace. It smelled of aging paper, leather bindings, and the faint, dry scent of ink. To her, this was the smell of possibility. Each scroll, each bound codex was a door. She would run her small fingers over the tooled leather covers, feeling the indentations of forgotten craftsmen. The texture of the parchment was a landscape under her fingertips, sometimes smooth and glassy, other times rough and fibrous. She learned to read not just the words, but the stories the books themselves told, of their travels, their owners, their survival. She read tales of distant India and Persia, accounts of jinni and ghouls from the deep desert, chronicles of kings and caliphs whose wisdom and folly were laid bare on the page. She did not just read them, she inhaled them. The stories became part of her. They structured her way of seeing the world, teaching her that every life was a narrative, every choice a plot point, and that no ending was truly inevitable until the last word was written. Her father, the vizier, a man of profound learning and deep pragmatism, encouraged her studies, seeing in her a reflection of his own love for knowledge. He saw her intellect as a jewel to be polished, an ornament for a good marriage. He never imagined it would become a weapon. He never imagined it would be the only thing she would carry into the darkest room in the kingdom. The news of King Shahriyar's decree fell upon the palace like a shroud. The vizier's role, once a position of honor, became one of unbearable horror. Each day it was his duty to procure another of the kingdom's daughters for the king's bed, knowing it was also her deathbed. The weight of this task crushed him. He saw the grief in the eyes of the fathers, the silent terror of the mothers. His own home, once a sanctuary of learning, became a house of mourning for a tragedy that repeated itself with the rising of the sun. Scheherazade watched her father waste away, his face etched with the lines of a sorrow too vast to bear. She heard the whispers in the corridors, the sound of a city holding its breath, and in the crucible of this shared terror, an idea began to form in her mind. It was an idea so audacious, so contrary to every instinct for self-preservation that it felt like a form of madness. But it was a madness born of stories. She had read of heroes who faced dragons, of clever women who outwitted powerful demons. They never won through brute force. They won through wit, through courage, through their ability to change the rules of the game. They won by telling a better story than the one their enemy was living in. The confrontation with her father was the first test of her resolve. He sat in his study, the scrolls and books that had once been their shared joy now seeming like relics of a more innocent world. When she told him of her plan to volunteer as the king's next bride, he looked at her as if she had announced her own suicide. His reaction was a storm of grief and anger. He begged her, commanded her to abandon this insane notion. He told her a cautionary tale, a story of an ox and a donkey to warn her against inviting her own destruction. He, a man of stories himself, tried to use a story to save her, but her resolve was absolute. It was a terrifying calm, a certainty that chilled him to the bone. She responded to his tale with a quiet, unanswerable logic. "Father," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart, "either I will succeed and save the daughters of this kingdom, or I will die. But to do nothing, to watch you bring another girl to her death tomorrow, and the next day and the next, is a kind of death I cannot bear to live." In that moment, the vizier saw that his daughter was no longer a child of his library. She had become a character from one of its most dangerous tales, stepping off the page and into a world where the monsters were real. He relented, his heart breaking, and agreed to present his own daughter to the homicidal king. He was leading her to the slaughter, but he was also, against all reason, placing his last hope in the power of the words she carried within her. And so she enters the chamber of endings. The heavy doors close behind her, the sound of the bolt sliding into place a final, metallic punctuation mark on her old life. The air is still, heavy with the scent of oud and unspoken violence. King Shahriyar watches her, his eyes devoid of warmth, seeing not a person but a symbol, the next iteration of his unending ritual of vengeance. Scheherazade feels the primal, instinctual terror that any creature feels in the presence of its predator. Her heart is a frantic drum against her ribs. But her mind, honed by years of immersion in narrative, is already at work. She is not just a woman in a room, she is a narrator assessing her audience. His pain, she understands, has collapsed his world into a single brutal story. Trust leads to betrayal, love leads to death. He lives inside this story, and it is killing him as surely as it is killing his brides. She cannot fight this story with a counterargument. She cannot reason with a wound. She must build a new world around him, a world so vast and compelling that his own small, grim story is dwarfed into insignificance. As the night deepens, she makes her request, a plan prearranged with her younger sister, Audacious. "If it pleases the king, I would like to bid farewell to my sister." The king, indifferent, agrees. Audacious is brought in, and as instructed, she asks Scheherazade, "My sister, tell us one of your beautiful stories to pass this night, our last together." This is the opening move, the carefully constructed pretext, and with the king's weary consent, Scheherazade begins. She begins to spin the tale of the merchant and the genie. Her voice is calm, measured, drawing the king into the narrative not with drama but with detail. She doesn't just say the merchant was wealthy, she describes the weight of his coin purses, the loyalty of his clerks, the vast network of his caravans. She builds a world of tangible reality, a world of consequence and order. Then she introduces the chaos, the accidental killing of the genie's invisible son. The genie's rage is absolute, a mirror of the king's own. He makes a decree of death, unalterable and immediate. The king listens, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He understands this logic, and then Scheherazade makes her first move of narrative subversion. The merchant begs for a year's delay to settle his affairs. The genie, surprisingly, agrees. The story introduces a concept that has been banished from the king's world, the postponement of the inevitable. Night after night, this pattern continues. Scheherazade is engaged in the most high-stakes literary performance in history. Her creative struggle is immense, a marathon of invention against the deadline of dawn. This is not simply the act of remembering old tales. It is the act of curation, adaptation, and when necessary, pure creation. She becomes the paradigm of the exhausted narrator, the artist threatened by annihilation who must nonetheless continue to invent. We can imagine her in the deep hours of the night after the king has finally fallen into a restless sleep. Her mind is not at peace. It is a frantic loom, weaving the threads of the next day's survival. Where does the next story come from? She has exhausted the tales of merchants. She moves to the stories of fishermen and kings, of Sinbad and his impossible voyages. She must choose a tale that not only captivates but also subtly instructs. It must contain a puzzle, a moral dilemma, a moment of wonder that will snag in the king's mind and make him need the resolution more than he needs her death. There must have been nights when her well of stories ran dry, nights when she felt the crushing weight of her own mortality, the sheer impossibility of sustaining this 1,000 times over. In those moments of despair, her inner monologue must have been a torrent of fear and doubt. What is left to say? I have told of magic carpets and talking fish. I have narrated the lives of fools and sages. My throat is raw, my mind is a barren desert. The sun will rise, and he will see that I am empty, and then he will call the executioner. But then the discipline of a lifetime of reading takes over. A story is not a finite object. A story is a seed. She recalls the fundamental structure of the tales she knows best. Embedded narrative, the story within a story. It is a technique known as enchasment, a fitting of one box inside another. This is her salvation. The realization dawns on her, she doesn't need 1,000 completely new tales. She needs tales that are generative, tales that give birth to other tales. A character in her story can, to save his own life, tell a story, and a character in that story can do the same. She has discovered a formula for narrative infinity. This is the generative power of fiction, its autopoietic nature. It is a self-creating system. Scheherazade builds a labyrinth of words, a palace of branching corridors and endless rooms. The king, in following the thread of one story, finds himself in another and then another. He is lost, but he is willingly lost. He is no longer the master of the labyrinth, he is its most captivated inhabitant. His desire for her death is slowly, methodically being replaced by his desire for the story's continuation. He is undergoing a form of narrative therapy. He entered this arrangement as a tyrant, a judge demanding the ultimate price for a single crime. He is being transformed into an audience, a listener, a critic. He begins to see the world not as a monolithic statement of betrayal, but as a vast collection of narratives, each with its own logic, its own justice, its own surprising turns. The stories she tells are not simple fables of good and evil. They are filled with moral ambiguity, with tricksters who are heroes, with virtuous men who fall to temptation, with women who are cunning, brave, foolish, and wise. They are a portrait of humanity in all its messy, contradictory glory. They are, in short, the perfect antidote to his brutal, simplistic worldview. The core of her strategy is the cliffhanger. Let us expand upon this device, for it is more than a simple trick. It is a profound manipulation of time and power. First, we must define it. The cliffhanger in Scheherazade's hands is the art of the unfinished sentence. It is the deliberate suspension of resolution, transforming the natural human desire for closure into a tool of survival. It is an epistemological weapon against an ontological threat. The threat, her death, is a matter of being, her defense, the story, is a matter of knowing, or more accurately, the desire to know. She makes the king's desire to know what happens next more powerful than his desire to make her cease to be. Now let us imagine this scene in its raw, physical reality. It is the 100th night. The story she tells is of a prince transformed into an ape. He is a musician of unparalleled skill, and his only hope of returning to his human form is to be recognized by a princess who can see the soul beneath the beast. The princess is intrigued by the melancholy music the ape plays on the oud. She senses a story behind his sad eyes. The king is leaning forward, his usual stony expression softened with an almost childlike focus. Scheherazade's voice is a soft murmur, her words painting the scene with vivid color. She describes the moonlight on the palace garden, the scent of the night-blooming jasmine, the soulful, heartbreaking melody that pours from the ape's oud. Just as the princess is about to speak the words that might break the curse, Scheherazade glances at the window. She sees the faint, pearlescent glow of the approaching dawn. She stops. The final, crucial chord of the oud hangs in the air unresolved. The princess's mouth is open, the words of recognition unsaid. Silence descends upon the room. The king stares at her, his brows furrowed. The spell is broken, but a new one has been cast. The reality of the executioner and the decree floods back into the space, but it is now competing with the phantom reality of the ape prince and the princess. The king is caught between two worlds. He can return to his grim, repetitive reality, or he can remain for one more day in hers. His need for the end of the story is now a physical ache. The rest, he grunts, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. Tomorrow, he has made his choice. What is happening in Scheherazade's mind in this moment? It is a tightrope walk over an abyss. Each night, she must gauge her audience with perfect precision. Stop too soon and the hook is not set. Go on for too long and the story resolves, leaving no reason for her to live. Her inner world is a constant calculation of narrative tension. She is not just a storyteller, she is a master of suspense, an editor, and a psychologist. She feels the subtle shifts in the king's breathing, notes the moments his eyes widen. She is reading him as she reads a scroll, searching for the passage that will ensure he turns the page. The fear is ever present, a cold knot in her stomach. But alongside it is a growing sense of power, the intoxicating realization that her mind, her words, are bending the will of the most powerful man she has ever known. She is not just saving her life, she is conducting a grand experiment in the nature of empathy and imagination. And how does this ancient technique apply to our modern world? We live in an age of weaponized cliffhangers. The principle that kept Scheherazade alive is the same one that fuels the billion-dollar streaming industry. Every episode of a serialized drama that ends with a shocking revelation every next time on, trailer is a direct descendant of her strategy. Social media algorithms function in the same way, offering an endless scroll of unresolved information, each post a tiny, addictive narrative hook designed to keep us engaged, to postpone the moment we put the device down. We are all King Shahriyar, held captive by the promise of the next piece of the story. We trade our time, our attention, our sleep for the dopamine hit of narrative resolution. Scheherazade's life-or-death struggle has become the blueprint for our digital economy, a constant, low-grade battle for our consciousness fought one cliffhanger at a time. Her nightly performance reminds us that the desire to know what happens next is one of the most powerful and exploitable forces in the human psyche. The nights bleed into one another, turning into weeks, then months, then years. The seasons turn outside the palace walls. The searing heat of summer gives way to the mild, jasmine-scented spring. Scheherazade, from her window, watches the world change, a world she is only able to witness because of the world she creates each night. The king is changing too. The transformation is slow, almost imperceptible at first. It begins with his engagement. He starts to interrupt her stories, not with threats but with questions. Why did the fisherman trust the genie? Was the caliph truly wise to disguise himself as a commoner? He is no longer a passive recipient. He is an active participant, a collaborator in the construction of meaning. He is learning to think in shades of gray. The stories have become his education. Scheherazade, the condemned bride, has become his teacher. She has given him 1,000 vicarious lives. He has been a beggar and a king, a sorcerer and a sailor. He has felt the terror of being lost at sea and the joy of finding a hidden treasure. He has learned of love that endures and betrayal that is forgiven. He has been forced night after night to inhabit the minds of others, and in doing so, his own mind has begun to expand. His own trauma, once an all-consuming fire, is now just one story among many. The narrative Scheherazade has built is not just a defense, it is a cure. She is redirecting his destructive will, channeling his rage into curiosity, his despair into wonder. She is healing him with fiction. The 1001st night arrives. Nearly 3 years have passed since she first entered this room. The space is no longer a tomb of endings. It has become a theater of life, a university, a sanctuary. Scheherazade has borne him 3 children during this time, sons who are living, breathing proof that their story has created a future. On this final night, she knows the performance must reach its climax. She does not begin a new tale of faraway lands. Instead, she begins the most dangerous and powerful story of all, her own. This is her masterpiece. She tells the king the story of a great and powerful monarch named Shahriyar, who, wounded by a terrible betrayal, made a vow to marry a new bride each day and execute her at dawn. She tells of the vizier who was forced to carry out this dreadful task, and of his wise and courageous daughter who volunteered to stop the slaughter. The king sits bolt upright. He is no longer listening to a story, he is seeing his own reflection in a mirror of words. Scheherazade has achieved the ultimate narrative enclosure. She has embedded the frame story within the story itself. It is a moment of profound and unsettling self-reference. Let us examine this act through the lens of auto-generative fiction. We define this as the principle that fiction is a self-sustaining system, capable of creating its own reality and its own continuation. Stories are not just about the world, they are a part of the world and they can change it. By telling the king his own story, Scheherazade is demonstrating this principle in the most visceral way possible. She is showing him that he is not a god dispensing absolute justice, but a character in a narrative. And like any character, his actions have meaning, his choices have consequences, and his ending is not yet written. Imagine the scene of this final revelation. The children are brought before him. Scheherazade concludes her tale, her voice no longer just that of a storyteller, but of a historian, a philosopher, a wife, and a mother. "O great king," she says, her gaze unwavering, "I am the woman in the story, these are your children. For 1,001 nights I have told you tales of the past, but now I ask you to consider the future." The king looks at his sons. He looks at this woman who has filled his nights with more life and wonder than he had ever known. The labyrinth of stories she has built has finally led him back to himself, but to a self that has been fundamentally changed. In his mind, the walls of his old story finally crumble. The brutal certainty of his decree, the pillar of his identity for so long, dissolves. He sees his cruelty for what it was, not strength, but a profound weakness, a fear of complexity, a terror of being hurt again. Scheherazade did not defeat him, she taught him. She gave him the gift of 1,000 perspectives, and with it, the capacity for empathy. The ontological certainty of his pain has been replaced by the epistemological wisdom of her stories. He understands that reality is not a fixed decree, but a story we choose to tell ourselves. This concept resonates deeply in our modern, postmodern world. We are more aware than ever that we live inside vast, competing narratives, political narratives, national narratives, personal narratives. Like Shahriyar, we can become trapped in stories that limit us, stories of grievance, victimhood, or anger. Scheherazade's final act is a powerful reminder of the possibility of metafiction, of the ability to step outside our own story, to see it as a story, and to choose to write a different ending. The works of authors like Jorge Luis Borges or Salman Rushdie, who play with self-reference and the infinite, looping nature of stories, are the literary children of Scheherazade. They understand, as she did, that the most powerful magic is the one that reveals the narrative machinery that governs our lives, and in doing so gives us the freedom to create a new one. The dawn of the 1002nd day is different. The light that fills the room is not a harbinger of death, but a clean, clear light of beginning. The king, Shahriyar, a man remade by words, officially revokes his brutal decree. He embraces Scheherazade not as his temporary storyteller, but as his queen. The kingdom exhales a collective sigh of relief it has held for nearly 3 years. The reign of terror is over, defeated not by an army or an uprising, but by the sustained, courageous act of a single imagination. Scheherazade's legacy is vast and multifaceted. She becomes the novelist, the archetypal figure of the storyteller compelled to spin tales not for fame or fortune, but for existential necessity. She is the patron saint of all artists who create against a deadline, against the forces of silence and annihilation. Her influence echoes through the centuries, shaping the very structure of how we tell stories. Every novel that uses a frame narrative, every film that employs a story within a story, pays homage to the technique she perfected as a matter of life and death. Writers of the magical realism movement in particular can be seen as her direct descendants. They, like her, use the fantastic, the magical, the impossible, the marvelous, not as mere escapism, but as a way to critique and illuminate the often brutal and absurd realities of political oppression, historical trauma, and social injustice. They understand that sometimes, the only way to tell the truth about a harsh reality is to invent a counter-reality, a story so powerful it can bend the bars of the world's prison. But perhaps her most profound legacy lies in the field of human psychology, in the practice of narrative medicine and therapy. What Scheherazade did for King Shahriyar is, in essence, what therapists and healers do for those shattered by trauma. A traumatic event, like the king's betrayal, can collapse a person's world into a single, toxic story that plays on an endless loop. Narrative therapy is the process of helping that person become the author of their own life once more. It is the act of restoring, of constructing a new narrative that is richer, more complex, and more empowering than the one dictated by the wound. It is the process of finding the words to build a future when the past feels like a final verdict. We see this in support groups, in clinics, in quiet offices all over the world. A person speaks their pain and in the telling begins to separate themselves from it. They tell the story of what happened to them, and then, with help, they begin to tell the story of who they are in spite of it and who they want to become. Each of these small, courageous acts of self-narration is a flicker of Scheherazade's candle, a testament to the belief that a better story can, quite literally, save a life. Her final image is not one of grandeur but of quiet continuation. We can picture her years later in the same palace library where her own journey began. The room is filled with afternoon light. She is surrounded by her children, and she is reading to them from a large, leather-bound book. Her voice is the same, calm and steady, but now it is not a tool of survival but a gift of love. She has passed on her inheritance, the greatest inheritance of all, the knowledge that stories are not just a reflection of life but the very substance of it. She ensured her own survival, healed a broken king, and saved a kingdom. But her greatest triumph was to transform the sword into the word, to prove that the most enduring power is not the power to end a life, but the power to begin a story. If a single voice, weaving tales in the face of annihilation, can rewrite the decree of a king and reshape the soul of a kingdom, what does this tell us about the stories we tell ourselves every day? What brutal internal decrees are we living under, and what narratives might we invent to grant ourselves a reprieve? If a story told at the right moment can hold back the dawn, what narrative are we choosing to live by, and what execution are we, with every word we speak, choosing to postpone?